Republican strategist Kevin McLaughlin, former deputy executive director for the National Republican Senatorial Committee, this during the 2016 election cycle. James Peterson, MSNBC contributor and host of WHYY's The Remix podcast, and David Litt, former speechwriter for President Obama and the author of Thanks, Obama, My Hopey, Changey White House Years. I always get a kick out of saying the title of that book, David. It's a great one. All right, guys, good to see you all. Kevin, I'm going to start with you here. Okay. The president is reacting to some pretty serious charges about his intelligence, his mental stability. It's coming not only from his Democratic opponents, but according to Michael Wolff's book, from many of his own White House advisors. What are you hearing from Republicans on the Hill about all this? Do any of these concerns ring true with them?
Well, I think it does. And, the first thing I would say is, as a former staffer, if I was chief of staff at the White House, the first thing I would do is find out who allowed this to happen. A guy who's a contributor to the Hollywood Reporter gets this kind of access to the West Wing is malpractice beyond malpractice. I would root these people out. If they knew about it, they should be fired. My guess is it's people, though, who are already gone, i.e. Steve Bannon, because this is a Bannon special, and this is the way the place was run in the beginning. And so I think it's complete and total malpractice, but at the same time, I think there's been a lot of concern whispered about inside Washington, both in Republican and Democrat circles, about the way the White House is run and the president. But I do think that there's probably, I don't think that there's a lot of truth to it, but I think that there's a little bit of smoke here, and I think it's probably very concerning for this White House.
Yeah, you'd think so. If it is even if a little bit of smoke here, it's not good, certainly. David, as a former Obama speechwriter, I want to get your take on the way the president decided to fight back against these claims, describing, his resume in this press gathering in this last hour, tweeting this morning that his two greatest assets have been mental stability and being very smart. And that part, the mental stability and being very smart, I mean, who writes like that? Talking like that's like a fifth grade girl. I mean, what was your reaction to that?
Well, Alex, thanks for having me today. And I do think most Americans are not going to read this book, but they are going to take away one thing from this controversy, and here's what it is. President Trump's response to a book that suggests he is a petulant, self-obsessed, childlike person is to behave like a petulant, self-obsessed, childlike person. This is not what a very stable genius would do in this situation, but I don't think any of us is surprised by that.
Okay. So no surprise on your part, David. What about you, Peter? Your take on the Democrats' approach to all this. You got Politico, which has this report saying more than a dozen lawmakers, all Democrats except for one Republican senator, met with Bandy Lee. That's a Yale psychiatrics professor. This happened last month at this meeting, and Dr. Lee warned them, quote, that he's going to unravel, and we are seeing the signs. So is this whole thing with the Yale psychiatry professor, I mean, is this a political stunt, or do you think Democrats are actually considering some sort of an attempt to build a case for and ultimately invoke the 25th Amendment?
The Democrats are just focused in the wrong direction, including on this, because they don't have any power to implement anything the psychiatrist or any psychiatrist has to say. What Democrats need to look at are two things. One is 2018. The only path forward for our country and for Democrats is 2018. So all talk of impeachment or invoking the 25th Amendment is just, in many ways, extraneous chaff, much like this book. My real concern is that we now have, as my colleague just said, a stable genius who is probably closer than anyone since the invention of the nuclear weapons to an impulse launch. That's what I'm most concerned about.
Understandably so. James, you have the president who also took shots at Michael Wolff, of course, the author of Fire and Fury, and he says he doesn't know me, he never interviewed me, and he pointed out that Michael Wolff's credibility has been called into question by many out there, though he said he'd spoken to him at least, and there is on the record a phone call that the White House admits the two had. So how do you weigh what to believe here?
Well, I think of the book as a bombshell without question, Alex, but it's more of a bombshell in terms of confirmation as opposed to any kind of revelation. You don't need Fire and Fury to understand that this president behaves himself like a child at times. All you have to do is follow his Twitter feed. You don't need to understand that this White House has been chaotic. From a book, you can see the chaotic nature of this White House by the way it's prosecuted its agenda over the course of the last year. So the evidentiary piece of the book is, to me, less important. The American people can look at what's going on, can look at at the president's Twitter feed, can look at the ways in which policy the way in which policy has been enacted by this administration, by the ways in which people have been fired and the sort of revolving door of the administrative staff itself. There's evidence in the public sphere that this book might confirm that I think makes it believable. So the believability factor here, I think, is evidentiary in the actual practice of the Trump administration.
You know, David, Michael Wolff implies in his author's note that around the time John Kelly was named chief of staff, his access to the White House came to an end, which, you know, goes to Kevin's point that he was making, like, who let this guy in the door in the first place. But he says that in the 18 months before that Michael had completed more than 200 total interviews with the president and most members of his senior staff. Wolff also says, look, I've got the recordings to back this up. I've got the notes as well. As a former White House official, David, how plausible is all of that? I mean, generally speaking, how open are White House staffers to talking with people with unfettered access to the West Wing?
Well, I'm a former White House staffer, but I also served in a White House that was run competently. And I think whether or not you read this book, it's pretty obvious this White House is not run competently. I mean, look at what Michael Wolff says, which almost everyone agrees did happen. You basically had a reporter, everyone knew he was a reporter, hanging out on a couch in the West Wing, grabbing people as they walked by. Was it 200 interviews? Was it 150 interviews? I have no idea. But the idea that someone would let this happen is a sign that this place is not being run well. And remember, this is when Trump described his White House as a well-oiled machine. He said things were going great. And so I think this is not an issue of bringing in John Kelly or bringing in someone else. This is an issue of bringing in Donald Trump. If Donald Trump is in charge of the White House, it's going to look like chaos. They can mitigate it, but they're never going to be able to fix that. And the fact that you had a journalist hanging out in the West Wing, grabbing people in the hallway for weeks, is a sign of that.
But David, can I ask you about this? Because I asked Jonathan Alter, who, as you know, wrote a book about President Obama, and he was on that couch in the West Wing, in the hallway, where staffers come back and forth. So if anybody's sitting there and they ask a question, do they have to immediately identify themselves as, you know, I'm writing a book? Or is this on the record or off the record? Or is it just, as Jonathan said, a lot of times saying, hey, I'd love to grab time with you later, let me make an appointment with you? I mean, what is that like when someone's sitting on the couch in the West Wing and you've got any manner of administration officials walking by?
I can only tell you how I would have reacted. I was a sort of mid-level speechwriter in the White House. If someone, whether or not they had said they were a journalist, was asking me a kind of journalist-type question, I would have immediately silently panicked and said, you know, you should talk to someone in the press office. And that's because I didn't have my own agenda while I was there. I was trying to serve the president's agenda. I didn't want to say something that would end up in a book like that, that would end up making the president look bad. Clearly, the White House is full of people who care more about their own interests than the president's interest or the national interest. And I think that flows from the top. You have a president who is self-centered, who doesn't care as much about citizens in this country, for example, in Puerto Rico, or kids who are going to run out of health insurance if Congress doesn't do something. He's busy tweeting about a book because it said some mean things about him. That's not what we expect, but that trickles down through the entire organization.
So, Kevin, in the press gathering about an hour ago,